So imagine stepping off a plane into a foreign country. You turn on the news in your hotel, and there's just wall-to-wall coverage of this massive upcoming election.
Right, the classic scene.
Yeah, exactly. You walk down the street, campaign posters are plastered on literally every surface. Later, you walk past a polling station, lines are out the door, people are dropping paper ballots into boxes. And if you just took a snapshot of that specific moment, you'd probably point at it and say, well, there it is. That's a democracy.
I mean, it's the most common mental shortcut we make, right? We see the ballot box and we just assume the entire political system behind it must be democratic.
Right. But then you look a little closer and you realize, wait, the main opposition leader was mysteriously disqualified from running last month.
Happens all the time.
Yeah. And the television stations are, all owned by the incumbent president's family. And the courts, hand-picked loyalists. Suddenly, that ballot box doesn't look like a tool of freedom at all. It looks like a prop in a really expensive piece of political theater.
That is exactly it.
So welcome to this deep dive. Today we are tackling a seemingly simple question that is actually one of the most fiercely contested debates in global politics. We're asking, what exactly is democracy?
And it is a fascinating moving target because once you step beyond the basic dictionary definition, you realize that democracy isn't just one static thing. It's a spectrum, a methodology, and in a lot of cases, a really fragile experiment.
Okay, let's unpack this because I've been poring over the source material today. We've got Charles Tilley's historical analyses, the latest VDEM democracy reports, the Economist Intelligence Units Index. And there is this massive philosophical divide right at the outset.
Oh, definitely.
Like before we can even measure whether a country is democratic, we have to decide if democracy is a noun or a verb. Is it a static checklist of rules, or is it this living, breathing historical journey?
Right. That is the core tension defining modern political science. Let's look at the system view first. This is the noun. It treats democracy as a fixed procedural arrangement.
A checklist.
Exactly, a checklist. It asks very quantifiable short-term questions. Does this nation have universal suffrage? Are there free elections? Is there a written constitution outlining the separation of powers? And if you check those boxes, boom, you are a democracy.
Which feels very clean and scientific, I guess.
Yeah.
But reading through Tilley's work, he argues that relying purely on that checklist leads to what he calls the illusion of instant democracy.
Yeah, the idea that you can just install it like software.
Right. This idea that you can just helicopter into a transitional society, drop a constitution and a voting booth into the capital city, and magically expect a stable representative government to just spring to life.
Which, as we've seen historically, almost never works. And that is exactly where the process view comes in.
The verb.
The verb, yes. This lens conceptualizes democracy as a long-term, really messy, evolving trajectory. It's shaped by centuries of class struggles, economic shifts, deep cultural adaptations.
Because you can't just legislate a culture.
Right. No, you really can't. You can't just pass a law demanding political tolerance or a cultural commitment to peaceful conflict resolution overnight. Yeah. Those norms, they have to be cultivated.
Until he goes even further. He argues that democratization is never a finalized achievement. You don't just cross a finish line, grab your medal, and get to relax.
Right. It requires continuous maintenance against de-democratization. It's an active fight.
Yeah. And he breaks this process down into a few necessary steps, starting with, suppressing autonomous coercive power centers.
Right, which sounds like total academic jargon, but it basically means the state has to have a monopoly on force.
Meaning no independent warlords.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You cannot have private militias or rogue military factions operating outside the law. If a local gang or a military general can just threaten voters with violence, your ballot box is entirely useless.
Right. The system breaks down before it even starts. And the second step Tilley outlines is insulating public politics from categorical inequality.
Meaning the wealthy and powerful shouldn't be able to just buy the state machinery for their own benefit.
Precisely. But the most intriguing part of Tilley's framework, and honestly, arguably the most difficult part, is what he calls the integration of trust networks.
Oh, this is a huge concept.
I really wanted to dig into that because that term completely reframed how I look at government. What exactly is a trust network in this context?
So think about the interpersonal connections you rely on for survival and long-term security. Historically, these were kinship groups, religious sects, trade guilds, or even, underground mutual aid societies.
Like your personal safety net.
Right. And in an authoritarian regime, citizens intentionally keep these networks completely hidden from the government.
Oh, wow. Why?
Because you don't want the king knowing about your wealth, your trade routes, or your sons. Because the king will just tax your wealth and conscript your sons to go fight his wars.
Right, so it's a basic survival mechanism. You keep your real trust local and hidden.
Exactly. Democratization only really takes hold when citizens begin to contingently integrate those private trust networks into public politics.
Okay, wait, what does that actually look like in practice?
It's the moment a society collectively says, okay, we are going to risk our long-term interests on the performance of the state. We're going to trust a national pension system instead of just hoarding gold under the floorboards.
I see.
We're going to trust public schools to educate our children.
And once citizens make that gamble, they suddenly have this massive vested interest in holding the state accountable. Like, if my actual pension is tied up in the state apparatus, I care deeply about who is running the treasury.
Exactly. You have skin in the game now.
So viewing democracy purely as a system feels a bit like buying a fully built smart house. You expect you can just walk in, flip a switch, and it runs perfectly.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it's actually less like buying a smart house and much more like planting a garden.
Okay, I like that.
Yeah, you can't just drop a voting booth seed onto concrete and walk away. The soil, the social conditions, the cultural norms, those deep trust networks has to be painstakingly cultivated over generations.
And because different societies have entirely different soil, right? Like different histories, different trust networks, they end up growing completely different types of democracy.
Exactly.
Which perfectly explains why there isn't just one universal blueprint. Looking at the sources, there are basically 4 distinct flavors of democracy that countries tend to adopt.
Yeah, let's walk through them, starting with the most basic one, electoral democracy.
The minimalist approach.
Right. This is the minimalist view championed heavily by the 20th century economist Joseph Schumpeter. He basically argued that we overcomplicate things.
How so?
In his view, democracy is nothing more than a method. It's a competitive struggle for the people's vote to select leaders. It doesn't promise social justice. It doesn't promise equality. It just promises that leaders can be swapped out without bloodshed.
It's pragmatic, sure. But reading the critiques of Schumpeter, that model feels dangerously hollow.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, if voting is the only requirement, what happens to the minority who loses the vote? And electoral democracy can easily coexist with authoritarian practices.
Yep, happens all the time.
If an elected leader shuts down opposition media the literal day after winning, you technically still had an election, but it hardly feels free.
Which is the exact criticism that birthed the second flavor, liberal democracy.
Okay, and this one is about rights.
Right. This model is rooted in Enlightenment thinkers like John Locke and Montesquieu. It takes Schumpeter's competitive elections and wraps them in heady constitutional armor.
So this is where the rule of law comes in.
Yes. Liberal democracy is obsessed with limiting government power. It introduces an independent judiciary and strict constitutional rights to protect civil liberties. Freedom of speech, religion, assembly.
To protect against the majority, right?
Exactly. It's designed specifically to prevent what Alexis de Tocqueville called the tyranny of the majority. If 51% of the population votes to confiscate the property of the other 49%, the liberal framework empowers a judge to step in and say, no, that right is untouchable regardless of the vote.
But even the liberal model isn't perfect.
Yeah.
The recurring critique I saw in the reading is that it breeds apathy. Totally. It turns citizens into these passive consumers of politics. You show up, you cast a ballot every 4 years, and then you just go home while the elites run everything.
Right. And if we want to fix that apathy, we have to look at the third flavor, participatory democracy.
Okay, the hands-on approach.
Heavily influenced by Jean-Jacques Rousseau, this model demands direct citizen involvement. It actively tries to decentralize power through things like referenda, participatory budgeting at the city level, and local citizen assemblies.
Oh, wow.
The core philosophy is that legitimacy comes from active, daily civic engagement, not just delegating power to a representative.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. Because while participatory democracy sounds incredibly empowering on paper, it seems like a logistical nightmare for a modern nation of 50 or 100 million people.
It is a massive challenge, yeah.
I mean, the sheer time constraint. Most people have jobs, kids, mortgages. We can't all sit in local assemblies debating municipal water policy all day.
No, we definitely can't.
Plus, isn't there a massive risk of populism? The sources point out that if everything is a direct referendum, Public policy can swing wildly based on whatever trending emotion is whipping up the crowd that week.
You've hit on the exact scalability problem that plagues the participatory model. It demands a level of civic education, free time, and sustained attention that is virtually impossible at a national scale.
Right.
Which is why political theorists like Jürgen Habermas pivoted to the fourth flavor, deliberative democracy.
Okay, so how does that solve the time problem?
By shifting the focus from the volume of participation to the quality of the discourse.
Interesting.
Yeah, deliberative democracy argues that a decision isn't legitimate just because a bare majority voted for it. It's legitimate because it was the result of reasoned, inclusive, and respectful public deliberation.
So it's about the process of talking it out.
Exactly. It focuses on creating structured environments where citizens actually have to listen to opposing viewpoints, consult experts, and reach a reasoned consensus, rather than just angrily pulling a lever in a voting booth.
The standout example of this in action, and this absolutely fascinated me in the source material, was Ireland.
Oh, it's a brilliant case study.
They actually put this into practice with their national citizens' assemblies to tackle incredibly sensitive constitutional issues. Things like the legalization of abortion and same-sex marriage.
Right.
Instead of just throwing these explosive issues straight to a polarized national vote, they randomly selected a representative sample of 99 ordinary citizens.
And the structure of those assemblies is the key. They didn't just put 99 random people in a room and tell them to argue.
Right, that would be a disaster.
Total disaster. They brought them together over multiple weekends. They brought in medical experts, legal scholars, and advocates from both sides of the aisle.
Oh, wow.
And the citizens could ask questions, deliberate in small, facilitated groups, and really chew on the nuance.
It completely changed the tone of the whole country. By the time the recommendations from the Assembly went to the wider Irish public for a final referendum vote, the national conversation had already been shaped by this thoughtful, reasoned framework.
Exactly. It diffused the toxic polarization you usually see.
It proved that you can blend these flavors. You can use the deliberative model to inform the liberal and electoral models.
And in reality, every functioning democracy is a blend. You need the electoral mechanics for scale, the liberal constraints for rights, and occasional participatory or deliberative tools to maintain public trust.
Okay, so if democracy is this messy, shifting garden of four completely different models, how on earth do global organizations actually grade it?
It's tough.
Like, I look at the VDEM project, or the Economist Intelligence Units Index, and they are ranking countries on spreadsheets down to the decimal point. How do you operationalize all this dense philosophy into hard data?
It's a monumental task, but these indices do it by breaking those broad philosophies down into observable indicators. They generally focus on four core pillars: freedom, competition, accountability, and the rule of law.
Okay.
But let's zoom in on accountability, because that is really where the mechanics of power are measured. They divide it into two very distinct axes: vertical and horizontal.
Well, vertical accountability makes intuitive sense. That's from the bottom up.
Yeah.
Citizens holding the state in check.
Exactly. Elections are the ultimate vertical tool. If a leader is corrupt or completely incompetent, the population just votes them out.
Right.
But vertical accountability alone isn't enough, which is where horizontal accountability comes in. This is how state institutions check each other on an equal horizontal plane.
So like the legislature investigating the executive branch.
Yeah.
Or a Supreme Court striking down an unconstitutional law passed by Parliament.
Power checking power. What's fascinating here is how indices like VDEM use the presence or absence of these specific accountabilities to categorize regimes. Take a look at the comparison often made between Jamaica and Kazakhstan.
Okay.
On paper, both countries hold regular elections.
But the reality on the ground is night and day.
Right. Under a purely procedural vertical view, you might call both of them democracies. But the data shows Kazakhstan's elections are highly controlled, opposition is suppressed, and there is almost zero horizontal accountability. The executive just runs everything.
Wow.
So the indices categorize it as an authoritarian regime. Jamaica, conversely, qualifies as an electoral democracy. It has robust political competition and genuine vertical accountability, even if it struggles with certain institutional flaws or crime affecting civil liberties.
And these indices are constantly updating because, like we said, the garden is always shifting.
Constantly.
Just recently, looking at the EIU data, South Korea was actually downgraded from a full democracy to a flawed democracy.
Right, that was a huge deal.
Yeah, that was triggered by a severe political crisis involving a temporary but highly damaging declaration of martial law by the executive. That is a massive blow to horizontal accountability and the rule of law.
Absolutely.
And Romania actually fell entirely out of the democratic categories, becoming the first EU member state to be labeled a hybrid regime after they controversially canceled a presidential election mid-process.
A hybrid regime is exactly what it sounds like. It sits right in the gray area. Elections happen, but the playing field is severely tilted. Opposition parties might technically exist, but the state uses its resources to ensure they can never actually win.
So I have a probing question on how strict these methodologies actually are.
Okay, shoot.
Say you have a country with perfectly clean elections, incredible vertical accountability. A leader wins in a historic landslide. But the very next day, claiming a quote-unquote mandate from the people, that leader immediately dismantles the independent courts and shuts down the media.
Oh, the classic authoritarian pivot.
Exactly. Essentially, they use vertical accountability to destroy horizontal accountability. Does that country instantly stop being a democracy, or does it just lose a few points and become flawed?
The indices are built to catch exactly that kind of executive overreach.
Oh, really?
Yeah. The EIU, for instance, uses a weighted average of 60 different indicators, but it has strict dependencies. If the civil service is completely politicized, or if horizontal checks are dismantled, the country faces severe penalties across its entire score.
So it tanks their ranking.
Heavily. In your scenario, the VDEM index would almost immediately downgrade that country from a liberal democracy to an electoral autocracy. The liberal constraints have been erased. A majority vote simply does not give you permission to destroy the system itself.
So what does this all mean? We have all these scores, these categories, these philosophies, but why does a shift from flawed democracy to hybrid regime matter to a normal citizen just trying to put food on the table?
It matters a lot.
This brings us to the real payoff in the literature, which is the relationship between democracy and human development.
Historically, there has been this massive debate around modernization theory. Scholars like Seymour Martin Lipset argued that economic development naturally fosters democracy.
Okay, how does that work?
Well, industrialization creates a middle class, education levels rise, and people naturally start demanding political rights. The sociologist Barrington Moore famously summed it up as, "No bourgeois, no democracy."
It frames democracy almost like a luxury good. Like once a society gets rich enough, they basically buy a democracy.
Right.
But there's a fascinating counter-argument in the Architecture of Governance report regarding something called the democratic premium.
Yes. The democratic premium completely flips the causality. It argues that democratic systems actively generate better human development.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, think about the basic incentives of survival for a politician. In an autocracy, a ruler only needs to please a very small circle of elites, the military generals, the wealthy oligarchs, to stay in power. They really don't need to care if rural public schools are crumbling.
Because the rural citizens can't vote them out anyway.
Exactly. But in a democracy, because of vertical accountability, politicians must compete for a broad base of votes. They are highly incentivized to address the needs of a much wider swath of the population.
It's just political survival.
Exactly. And the data bears this out. Democracies consistently show measurably better outcomes in public health, infant mortality, and broad service delivery because the system literally forces politicians to care about the vulnerable.
So democracy is the engine that drives the wealth and well-being, not just the luxury car you buy afterward.
Right, the engine.
But the engine can stall. The reports we are looking at are sounding a massive alarm about the present day. They call it the Great Reversal or democratic backsliding. Global average democracy scores are declining for the first time in decades.
And tying it all the way back to Charles Tilly, you can see exactly why the engine is stalling. When economic inequality rises sharply, the wealthy are able to bypass normal politics.
Oh, right.
And when average citizens look around and feel the system is totally rigged, what do? They withdraw their trust. They pull their trust networks out of public politics. And when that happens, the tangible developmental benefits of democracy are deeply threatened.
It's a sobering reality check, for sure. We've covered incredible ground today. We started by tearing down the illusion of instant democracy, exploring how it's a messy historical garden that requires constant tending.
Lots of tending.
We tasted the distinct flavors, the competitive electoral model, the rights-focused liberal model, the active participatory model, and the discourse-driven deliberative model that works so well in Ireland. We popped the hood on the indices to see how horizontal and vertical accountability actually measure the health of a state. And finally, we saw how that competitive engine directly fuels public health and human development.
This raises an important question, though, and I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. Building on that concept of trust networks, Tilly argued that democracy thrives when citizens integrate their personal vital trust into the public state. But look at the trajectory of the world today. We are seeing the massive rise of borderless digital communities, cryptocurrencies, and decentralized internet platforms.
Right, Web3, all of that.
Exactly. People are increasingly transferring their trust away from national governments and into global, encrypted digital networks. If the very foundation of a democratic state requires citizens to risk their long-term trust on the state's performance, how can traditional democracy survive or even evolve when the population decides to place its trust in the cloud instead of the capital?
Wow. If democracy really is a living, adapting garden, dealing with a borderless digital world might be the most extreme climate shift it has ever had to survive. The label on the map might still say democracy, but the reality underneath is shifting fast. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the labels, keep tending your garden, and we'll see you next time.